All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really gripping maritime procedural mystery. And honestly, I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this, mainly because it's not your typical story of massive explosions or sudden disasters. Now, this is a story about what happens right before a disaster, and how one incredibly focused individual stopped it dead in its tracks. We're looking at a true masterclass in maritime vigilance, exploring how a colossal container ship called the Aquilla Bay essentially revealed its secrets to someone who was just willing to look closely.
The container ship was silent. There were no alarms, but something was very wrong. I mean, picture this. You're approaching this thousands of ton steel leviathan just sitting there in shallow water. By every technological metric we have, everything is perfectly fine. But when you get up close, the hair on the back of your neck just stands up. That's the eerie contrast Coast Guard Lieutenant Tess Moran walked right into. A massive, quiet ship and a hidden danger lurking right there in plain sight.
Part 1. The Grounded Giant. Okay, let's dive into this.
To really grasp this mystery, we gotta look at the completely perplexing situation the Aquilla Bay was in. So the ship had unexpectedly grounded itself overnight. But look at what didn't happen here. There were absolutely no alarms triggered, zero distress signals sent out, no injuries, no pollution. The ship's chief mate, Santos, even showed the Coast Guard that all the hull sensors were reading a perfect green. It was basically just lightly touching the bottom, and the crew was entirely calm. It's bizarre, right? Like, when a giant ship gets stuck in shallow water, you naturally expect some kind of mechanical panic. But instead, just silence.
Section 2. A routine boarding.
So this sets the stage for Lieutenant Tess Moran and her steady partner Chief Morales as they board the vessel. Now I want you to burn this quote right here into your memory, because it is the absolute thematic core of our explainer today. Tess's father taught her, lines want to be straight. When they aren't, pay attention. She brought that exact mindset right onto the deck of the Aquilla Bay. She knew that in this line of work, boring is usually good. But she also knew things often seem totally fine right up until the exact second they aren't.
Let's look at how this morning unfolded. At 7 a.m., Morn and Morales get their helmets and harnesses on and climb up the pilot ladder. By 7:15, they meet the weathered Captain Haldane and Chief Mate Santos, who promise them there are no leaks, no damage, everything's fine. 7:30 hits, they divide up to walk the deck. For Morales, everything looks totally normal. But at 8 a.m., as Tess is walking down the catwalk through this incredibly tidy chessboard of colored shipping containers, she runs her hand along the cold steel. She actually feels the machinery vibrating under her feet, and then she stops.
Section 3. The millimeter gap. And this brings us to the critical discovery, the number 4. Why does this matter? Well, because out of literally thousands of perfectly stacked containers, Tess spotted an anomaly. And it was located on the 4th row up and the 3rd stack back from the bow. Try to imagine the sheer, overwhelming scale of a cargo ship for a second. Finding a millimeter-sized mistake on the 4th row up, it's literally like finding a needle in a haystack made entirely of steel. I mean, it would have been so incredibly easy to just keep walking. But Tess paused. Her pulse slowed down.
Now, real quick, before we look at what she actually saw, let's just make sure we're on the same page with the mechanics. What exactly is a twist lock? Basically, it's a standardized, super heavy-duty rotating connector that locks shipping containers together. You stack one container on top of another, the twist lock engages, and boom, they become a solid block that can survive the violent pitching waves of the open ocean. If these things fail, we're talking about massive, heavy steel boxes coming crashing down. It's bad news.
And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. On one side, we have what the sensors just assumed was happening, a fully engaged, perfectly flush twist lock. But on the other side is what Tess actually saw, a misseated twist lock. It was so subtle, kind of like a book with a page that isn't quite tucked in. She climbed up a ladder and spotted this tiny, thin line of light where there absolutely shouldn't be any light. The corner block was slightly proud and the lever wasn't perfectly aligned. We are talking about a literal millimeter gap.
So the obvious question here is, was the ship actually in immediate danger? Chief Mate Santos actually asked her this exact same thing when she pointed it out.
Well, the rest of the stack was currently taking the load, so no, disaster wasn't happening in that exact second. If it was a catastrophic failure, it'd be super obvious, right? Tearing metal, incredibly loud noises. But as Tess noted, this was a whisper, and whispers deserve respect. If left totally unchecked, once that ship hit the rolling waves of the open ocean, that tiny millimeter gap could have cascaded into a devastating structural failure. Section 4. Freeing the ship.
But before they can fully fix that container, they actually have to unstick the massive vessel from the mud. And this is a highly choreographed, super tense mechanical ballet. Step 1. You wait for noon, letting the tide naturally rise and lift the ship. Mother Nature does the heavy lifting. Step 2. The crew shifts the ballast water around the hull to perfectly tweak the ship's balance. And finally, Step 3. 2 tugboats, the Gannet and the Truman, take their positions. Captain Haldane orders the engines dead slow astern. It's kind of crazy to ask a ship to pull itself out of the mud. But inch by inch, the Aquilla Bay leans into it. With this soft little unfastening feeling, she just slides free into deeper water.
Section 5. The Twist Lock Catch.
With the ship safely escorted toward port, the mystery of that millimeter gap can finally be resolved. A harbor pilot expertly guides them in past the graffiti-covered breakwaters. And once docked, they don't mess around with guesswork. Stevedores, the real veterans of the docks, bring in a man left. An older stevedore gets right up to that fourth row and confirms it. The twist lock was caught on the edge. It was technically engaged but completely insecure. So a massive crane gracefully lifts the neighboring containers, and the stevedore physically realigns and secures our problem box. Tess's keen eye was completely, 100% validated.
Section 6. Why Small Details Matter. Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast in how we approach safety. On one hand, you have blindly trusting checklists and automated sensors, right? The ship's computers insisted everything was green. The loading manifests were all checked off. But that approach entirely missed the misseated twist lock. On the other hand, you have active human vigilance. Tess didn't just check boxes. She observed, she listened, she actually felt the vibrations, and that proactive approach caught a seriously dangerous anomaly long before it ever became a tragic headline.
And that kind of vigilance creates a real ripple effect. The very next day, back at the station, buried among mundane messages about, training and retirement parties, Tess found this unfamiliar email. It was just pure gratitude. Somebody on the loading side realized that Tess's catch didn't just save cargo, it actually prompted a massive shift in their own checklist processes. It potentially saved them from a reprimand, and more importantly, it made the whole port safer. She saved that email in a folder labeled Notes, just a quiet reminder to cherish the small victories.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question to chew on. In your own routines, whatever it is you do, what are the crooked picture frames and small wrong lines that you might be walking past every single day? We all have our own checklists and automated routines, for sure, but as Lieutenant Tess Moran showed us, true safety and true mastery of our environment really comes down to paying attention to the whispers. Keep your eyes open, guys, and never ignore a line that isn't straight. Thanks so much for learning with me today.